Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, we're jumping straight into a massive, rapidly developing story today. We're looking at the sudden collapse of a major international university partnership. And honestly, it really shows just how fast the academic world is colliding with modern national defense. So, what happens when a university degree actually becomes a national security threat? It's a high-stakes geopolitical mystery, right? And the wild part is, this isn't happening in some shadowy embassy or remote military base. It's literally playing out right now on a typical college campus, affecting real students and top-tier researchers.
Here's the breaking point. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong abruptly axed a multi-year academic partnership, specifically the agreement between the Australian National University and China's Shandong University. The ANU Shandong Joint Science College completely terminated. First reported by the Australian newspaper. What makes this so unprecedented is that it was done strictly on national security grounds. It absolutely sent shockwaves through the academic sector.
Okay, let's dive into this, because behind all the high-level political chess moves, there's a very real human element. 61. That is the exact number of Chinese students from the very first cohort of this joint program who are currently on the ground in Australia. They came here to study, and boom, their institutional backing is just gone. Now, Assistant Minister for International Education Julian Hill did confirm on Monday that these students will be allowed to finish their degrees, but Australian intelligence and law enforcement authorities are actively working through the broader issues with the institution on exactly what to do with them moving forward.
And honestly, that initial group of 61, just the tip of the iceberg. This joint program was not some tiny boutique exchange. It had a massive capacity of 1,200 students. To put that into perspective, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of ambitious young people who mapped out their educational futures, biology, chemistry, math, around this prestigious joint venture. And it just vanished overnight. The rug was completely pulled out from under them.
And the Australian government, they are not leaving any room for negotiation or some soft phase-out here. Senator Penny Wong sent a strict, formal letter to ANU demanding they must terminate the foreign arrangement for force majeure to the extent that it is legally binding under Chinese law by 18 January 2027. That's a hard, non-negotiable deadline. It essentially forces the university to completely dismantle this huge international operation and unwind years of planning. Now, what's really interesting about this is looking at the two totally different faces of this program. The public-facing curriculum sounded perfectly benign. Biology, chemistry, mathematics, standard university stuff, right? But beneath that, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute uncovered Shandong University's deeper research links back in China. We're talking advanced cryptography, cyber operations, and direct institutional ties to the very agency overseeing China's nuclear weapons program. The contrast between freshman biology and, nuclear research is exactly what triggered the alarm.
Which brings us to the core issue, the security overlap. See, ANU isn't just an average college. It's the central hub training Australia's future intelligence and defense professionals. It literally hosts the National Security College. And perhaps most importantly, it shares a dedicated laboratory with the Australian Signals Directorate. That's the nation's premier cyber defense agency. Having hundreds of students from a foreign university with reported military links sharing a campus with top cyber defense agencies, the government ultimately viewed that as an indefensible security overlap.
But you might be wondering, why cancel it right now? The partnership had been running since 2022. Well, the catalyst for this sudden cancellation actually came just 2 weeks prior, from across the Pacific. The U.S. Department of Defense officially added Shandong University to a blacklist of 130 foreign institutions engaging in problematic activities. In the international defense world, that phrasing strongly implies risks of military-civil fusion, where civilian research is covertly used for military tech, or direct espionage concerns. The connection between that U.S. blacklist and Australia's domestic education policy is pretty undeniable. Assistant Minister Julian Hill confirmed on Monday that the Joint Science College was determined to breach our national interest. And crucially, when making this point, he explicitly noted the U.S.'s change in assessment status. This is a truly fascinating moment. It perfectly illustrates the Australian government directly linking their domestic policy decision to a recent American military intelligence assessment. Now map out the geopolitical timeline of this partnership, and a very distinct pattern emerges. Back in 2017, ANU signs the first agreement with Shandong. By 2019, public data is already linking Shandong to the Chinese military. In 2021, a new foreign relations scheme actually grants the Australian government veto power over these exact types of deals. Yet remarkably, in December 2022, the agreement is renewed while Minister Wong is in office. It wasn't until July 2026, when the U.S. Pentagon blacklists Shandong, that Australia abruptly terminates the agreement the very next month, in August 2026. The sequence clearly illustrates that the government sat on this for years, only acting immediately after the U.S. Pentagon made its move.
And here is a truly surprising fact about all this. Even after canceling the flagship ANU deal over severe national security concerns, there are currently 116 other agreements with Shandong University still sitting on the Australian government register, completely untouched. No way, right? It really highlights a massive administrative backlog and a policy approach that kind of seems to be reacting to headlines rather than proactively sweeping the system.
Let's move to how this builds, because zooming out, the ANU cancellation isn't an isolated incident. It's really just one domino in a massive, systemic, legislative crackdown on Australian higher education. The entire sector is being reshaped. In the exact same week, a University of Queensland partnership with the Chinese Academy of Sciences was cancelled. The government is proposing sweeping powers for ASIO to conduct secret investigations into universities. They're enforcing blanket bans on research partnerships with sanctioned countries like Iran and Russia, and forcing universities to painstakingly report absolutely all foreign institutional dealings. And the legal stakes for academics now, they have literally never been higher. Consider the newly introduced Safeguarding Australia's Military Secrets, or SAMS Act. It threatens up to 20 years in prison for unauthorized training in dual-use technology. Just for context, dual-use tech refers to innovations that work for both normal civilian purposes and military applications. Think AI, advanced drone programming, robotics. These are severe, almost wartime-style legislative measures placed directly on the shoulders of civilian researchers.
Behind the scenes, university administrations are acutely aware of this volatile landscape. Just look at internal strategy documents, like this one produced by the University of Technology, Sydney. It reveals exactly what's keeping vice chancellors awake at night. It outlines a literal worst-case scenario for disentanglement from China. It shows how universities are actively and quietly preparing for a total collapse of bilateral relations and a sudden end to decades of lucrative international cooperation. The institutional fears mapped out in these plans are absolutely massive. Administrators are game planning for strict teaching out obligations if programs are abruptly axed. They're forecasting devastating revenue losses from international students running into the hundreds of millions of dollars. They're even going so far as mapping out emergency evacuations for their staff currently based overseas. It's a sobering look at how geopolitical tension doesn't just stay in Parliament, it hits a university's bottom line and operational safety directly. But we really need to ground this high-level policy panic back to the human element. Everyday students, young people just trying to get an education, have increasingly been caught in the crossfire of this adversarial atmosphere. For example, international Chinese students have recently faced visa cancellations and intense interrogations, sometimes leading to deportation right at the Australian border. And this is often simply for not disclosing Junshun, which is a compulsory, standard university military training program that millions of ordinary students complete in China. It typically involves simple marching drills and team building rather than actual combat training, but it's now being flagged under the umbrella of extreme national security.
As you might imagine, public discourse on this whole situation is intensely divided. On one side, you've got citizens who feel that prioritizing national security absolutely outweighs any potential academic benefit. Voicing a very prominent sentiment in the community, one observer argued regarding the cancellation, "Yeah, good. Nothing those students could offer is worth a risk to our security, espionage." For a lot of people, protecting domestic intellectual property from foreign intelligence services just has to be the absolute priority, regardless of the impact on universities. Yet, right alongside that perspective, there's a fierce pushback from those who see this as a dangerous overcorrection. Countering the national security argument, another prominent voice in the discussion stated, "We should be building stronger ties with Chinese academia, not destroying them to try appease the anti-science moron in the White House." This perfectly captures the opposing viewpoint, that these heavy-handed political crackdowns ultimately harm global scientific progress and basically surrender Australian academic sovereignty to U.S. foreign policy interests.
So what does this all mean? It brings us right to the core tension of everything we've looked at today in this explainer. As the lines between open academia and classified national security continue to blur, where does global scientific cooperation go from here? Can we actually maintain the open, borderless pursuit of shared human knowledge while navigating the harsh, restrictive realities of modern geopolitical defense? It's a massive, incredibly complex question that's going to define the next decade of research. Thanks for joining me to break this all down. I hope this look at the source material leaves you with a clear understanding of the stakes involved and definitely an eagerness to explore this topic further.